So, welcome everyone to App Prep, and today we're talking about your application itself and filling that in and getting the request for transcripts in and getting your letter rec recommendations in and all that fun stuff. So, that's why I don't have any slides, because we're actually going to take a walk through one of these application services. Now, most people are probably pre-meds, I'm guessing, in this room, but because of the fact that med school has two different applications you're likely going to look at. One of them is AMCAS, and the other one is AACOMAS. One is MD, one is DO. And the fact that anybody else listening to this is going to be doing applications like CASPA or AACOMAS or PTCAS or VMCAS or whatever the other CASs are, I'm gonna look at the application for AACOMAS, the DO app, not the one for MDs. And the reason I'm going to do that is because AMCAS is very similar to all the other application services, but literally all of the other applications are through this company called Liaison. And so they all look identical. And so I get the biggest bang for the buck. I'm going to look at an application through CASPA today so that we can actually look at what all of these little things look like. So without further ado, let's look at what your application might look like. So AACOMAS is basically going to be the same process as what we're looking at here. I will point out the one major difference between AACOMAS and these systems. So first, you're faced with this view where you'll either choose to sign in or you'll create an account. If you haven't already done so, you would end up creating an account. How many people here have already created an account for their particular application coming up? So it looks like one or two of y'all have. I would say go ahead and create your account for your particular application. In the case of pre-meds, you will probably be creating both an MD on AMCAS and a DO on AACOMAS. You would be doing both because most people end up applying both to some MD schools and some DO schools. For the rest of y'all, you're probably applying to just one application system at any given time. The reason I'd say just get on there right now, like even today, is just to see what's there. See what it is that you're going to have to be entering into your application. That way you've got a nice, you kind of understand what you got to do before you do it. That makes sense? So I'm going to create an account. I already have an account on CASPA, but I'm going to create a new account. And that means we got to put all this information in, just like this basic characteristic information. I'm going to put in my name, Douglas McLemore. And I'm going to put in my email address. I got to use a different email address than I've used before, because that's actually one of the ways they track it. So if you already have an account on one email address, you will probably not be able to create that account. So that's, and put in my phone number. Just don't give me prank calls, please. 982, and then, oh wait, alternate phone number. I don't need one. There we go. That was an alternate phone number. I didn't need to put the same number in twice. You got to agree to this, or you don't have to agree to this. This is if they want to give you phone calls or send you text messages. Then you got to create your username. So I'm just going to use my characteristic username, and I'll use a lot of these systems, which is first and last name. That's common. If your first and last name don't work for this, if it kicks you out, do like first dot last or first and last plus a number, something like that, so you can like give yourself a unique username. And then I'm going to just put in my new passage for this one. Yeah, I'm not going to look at it because I don't want to show you what it is. You're always going to see a terms and conditions, which basically says, I agree to this. You don't have a choice. You can read all this. You can spend the time to decide whether or not you agree to this. But at the end of the day, if you're going to apply to one of these programs, you're going to have to click this button. There's no other way around it. And then if you're in the European Union, this message is going to, even if you're not in the European Union, this message is going to come up. They're just going to ask you, are you there or not? We're going to say no, because we're not located in a European Union country. So create your account. You will get an email and all kinds of fun stuff like about verifying your account and all that. And then when you plan to apply. So how many people are applying this summer? Got a me. Is that going to be the 2023 or the 2024 cycle? Like the 2022-23 or the 2024-25 cycle to apply? Yes. If we're applying this summer, we're in the 24-25 cycle. So the reason why I'm harping on this is because a lot of times people get that year switch mixed up. So if you're applying in the summer, that's the first year, or admission into 25 in the fall. So summer is the first year, fall of the following year is the cycle, like the way they name the cycles. So I'm going to actually say this is a test account just because I don't want to get anybody confused or anything like that. Then I can do save changes. Right away, some of these systems will ask you what programs do you plan on applying to. And I'm not going to choose any right away. You don't have to do this. Like sometimes you might already know some of the schools you plan on applying to. Sometimes you might not. I don't think it's necessary to pick them right up front. So I'm going to just hit escape like it says down here and move on to the next step. It doesn't want to let me hit escape at this one. So it's going to force me to pick a program. So there we go. I'm going to pick a program just so I can get past this step and then continue. And so already it's going to say, hey, you're going to owe this much. Don't worry about that number yet. That's going to be different. And literally every application service has what's called a fee assistance program. So if you haven't already looked up the fee assistance program for your future application, I would encourage you to do that, because like even just one school, that's $184 that I'm going to have to pay already if I'm applying to that PA school all by itself. So applications can get expensive. So should you apply to fee assistance programs? I'm going to say yes, even if you don't think you qualify. Because you may not realize what the qualification cutoffs are for any given program. I do suggest you do apply, because one school, that's not maybe a lot, but now you're applying to 10 or 20 schools, and then you're talking in the $2,000 range potentially for applications. So if you can get some discount on that, I would definitely encourage you to do so. I'm going to continue on to my application. And for, like I said, all of the application services except for AMCAS, it will look like this. AMCAS will look similar, but they're going to have like a menu on the left side, which has like the same thing: personal information, academic history, supporting. The thing they don't have is program materials, but they're going to have all these other parts except for program materials. So when you're filling out these applications, the nice thing is it tells you your progress. So when I first get started, usually what I encourage people to do is skip the personal information and go right over here to academic history. Why do I tell people to do this? To get right into the academic history? Because of this one right here, transcript entry. So I clicked on transcript entry, and this is going to say, go to colleges attended section. So if you need to go fill out the colleges attended, it tells you what you've got to do. But why would I jump to transcript entry pretty much right away? Why do you folks think so?
Is it because it takes a long time to get transcripts?
100%. Yes, it takes a long time to get your transcripts potentially. So especially say let's say you're graduating, you've already graduated, it's not as big a deal. But if you're graduating in June and you need those grades to go on your application, like that, you've got to get that all prepped up. So you're like, boom, go get my transcripts so that I can get them as soon as possible. Because you don't want to have to wait for those transcripts to hit. Transcripts can take a long time. So what you'd have to do is go through and find all the universities or colleges that you attended. Does that include community colleges?
Yes.
Yes, it does. Does that include community college classes you may have done in high school and got community college credit for them? Yes, it does. So you might actually forget what college that you got those high school units from. You got to maybe go back and talk to the high school and figure out which college it is, but you will have a college transcript for those classes. So all classes, all schools you've ever participated in at the college level will count. So let's say I'm just going to start with a community college. Let's say I went to Solano Community College because I used to live in Vacaville. Did I get a degree from them? No, I did not. Are they semester, quarter, trimester? Probably most of your schools are going to be quarter semester. Does anybody remember what Solano is, if they're semester or quarter? I'm just going to do a semester so I can show you what the semester looks like. And no, I'm not attending that school anymore. And when was my first semester? Let's say it was winter. Well, let's say fall of, that'd be a September of 2018. And then my last semester there was spring, which was, I finished up, June of 2019. So I only did 1 year of classes at that school. Save, and then you'll get this piece. And so when you're looking at each of the individual schools here, official transcript, order. So you got the order thing over here. This is what one of the first things I want you to do for every school, unless you're sort of waiting until your grades are done. So get this done right away. Hit on order. It'll probably say National Student Clearinghouse or Parchment for any given school. If you're looking at Davis, Davis is a Parchment school. You would use Parchment for it. Some other schools would be National Student Clearinghouse. What you would do is you would go to your school's registrar's website. Go to your school's registrar's website and ask them what system do they use if they have an electronic transcript. And then it's actually pretty easy. Once you get this, they're going to give you this information. Boom, boom, boom. Get that number. They tell you exactly what you're going to put in your transcript request. And then you go to your school's website and you would do the other end of it. So you go back to the school's website, request an official transcript. And just make sure you're getting this information from the application side. They'll give your ID number and all that. And then make sure that's attached to your transcript request on the college side. That's a great question. Should we only request transcripts after grades are out? Yes, if you need to use those grades for your application. So let me give two scenarios. One scenario, I needed to show an upward trend in my last year. So I really need those spring quarter grades to show up on my application. So then, yes, I would spend the time I would wait to request that particular transcript until I knew my official transcripts were ready at my college after spring quarter. And for Davis, that's basically school finishes in June. The transcript should be ready by the end of June. So that could potentially slow your application down a little bit. It's not too bad. As long as you get your application submitted by the end of June, you're pretty safe. That whole idea that your application has to be submitted on day one, that's a bit of a myth. It doesn't have to be day one. It just has to be month one, if you want to think of it that way. The other scenario is I've got pretty solid grades already. I don't really need those spring quarter grades on there. So I can go ahead and request my transcript right away, even before my final grades are on it for that last quarter, and it's going to be fine. So the decision you're making there is usually, do I need those grades to fill out my GPA more, or is my GPA going to be about the same? Does that make sense as an answer to that question? All right. Are AMC applications for attending fall 2025 open yet? Most of the systems are not ready for the upcoming cycle. There's a couple that are, I believe, like VMCAS for vet school is already ready to start getting applications in. But specifically for the med applications, your AMC application will open for entry in May and open for submission in June. For AACOMAS, it opens for entry in May and submission in May. So AACOMAS can go a little sooner. Although I would suggest doing your DO applications after your MD applications because of the fact that MD schools do rolling admissions while DO schools don't. So it's reasonable to hold off on your DO applications until after you finish your MD. That's also an important thing to look at, is when you want to get started with this process is often based on like what kind of system it is. Like at dental schools is definitely rolling admissions. You want to get those in sooner than later. Whereas vet schools, they don't do rolling admissions. So, but I'm not saying delay. I'm not saying wait until September, the deadlines to start submitting your applications for vet school. But what I'm saying is you don't have to have it like spot on right at the beginning of the cycle for vet school, like you do for dental and med. Those are the big ones that are rolling. Could you have entered a school where they require a mailed paper transcript? Yes. Some schools are not super tech savvy. What I would probably imagine this is a community college in a pretty remote area. From what I know and from what I've run into in California, I have not seen a school use a mailed transcript in a long, long time in California. So I would doubt this is going to apply to you. If this applies to you, these would literally be the first transcripts I would request, the mailed ones, because the electronic transcripts can take 2 to 3 weeks to make it to your application. The mailed transcripts can take a month or two to get there. So plan accordingly. Like I said, I doubt any of you went to a school that doesn't have an electronic transcript. That's pretty rare this day and age. And then once you've gotten all this process done, I ordered my transcript, and it'll say reorder if I need to. And it'll tell you whenever that transcript is received, it'll turn from not yet received to received. And again, that's very similar to what you're going to see in AMCAS. It just won't look exactly this way, but you're going to see the same kind of information. So any questions on when and how to retrieve your transcripts? All righty. So, oh, wait, here we go. Should you wait until you get your grades on OASIS before requesting? If you're talking about that June waiting time, yes, your grades would need to be reported on OASIS to make sure they're going to be on your official transcript. Yes. Alrighty. I'm going to have one more college or university in here. I'm just going to add in UC Davis. And so I'm going to just do UC Davis and see what comes up. And notice it can't find your school. And before we finish that point, just to make sure I understand correctly, if we want to show our spring quarter grades, should we request after the end of the quarter? No, you want your spring grades to show up, request it once after the quarter is complete and your grades show up on OASIS. So it's just easier that way. If you request it twice, by the way, you're going to have to pay twice. And again, we don't want to spend a whole lot of money on this if we can all avoid it. All right. So UC Davis, as you just found, doesn't show up if I just type in UC Davis. What should I probably type in? University of California. And now I'm going to find it Davis. And notice how there's two Davises. There's Davis and there's Davis Extension. The one that you want for what you are probably coming from, if you're coming straight out of Davis undergrad, is UC California Davis. If you took classes through an extension program, like Berkeley has an extension program, Davis has one, although you may know it as Continuing and Professional Education, or CPE. That's what those are referring to. Those are the continuing ed schools, the continuing ed departments. They have separate transcripts. So if you do a post-bac program or you do continuing education program classes, that's a separate transcript. So like if you did undergrad at Davis and then a post-bac or some additional continuing ed programs, you would have to put in the other transcript from extension. So I'm just going to add Davis. Did I obtain? Yes, I got my degree. It was a bachelor's of science. I did that just recently. I did that in December of, and I'm just making this stuff up, of course, But December of 2023, my major was chemistry. Put that in here. And my minor was a bunch of stuff, but honestly, your minor doesn't matter, so I usually leave that. Doesn't really matter. What quarter? It's a quarter system. Am I still attending? No. First quarter, fall, August 2020. I got to make sure I do this smart. I finished in fall, December of 2023. So just make sure you're putting your dates in accurately. This is usually not going to lead to a problem. So now I've got my 2 schools in there. Order this transcript. Good to go. Now, is it different for double majoring? If you double major, honestly, your major and your minor and your double major and all that stuff doesn't really matter. So med schools are using that honestly just for what do they call that stuff? Demographic information. So they're just using demographic information with that type of thing. So it's really irrelevant if you don't want to put that in there. You don't have to. Do we need to pay for transcripts for each med school we apply to? No. One for each application system, though. So if you do apply to MD and DO schools, you're going to use 2 application systems. You're going to have to request transcripts twice. But it's not to each individual school. It's to each individual application system. So another good question there. Thank you. So now I'm going to bop back to my application and see how it shows that I have some of my academic history in there. So it's showing as I go some of the things I've put in. The next place I always like to emphasize is transcript entry. And see this question down here? Would you like to use professional transcript entry? Yes or no? I am going to tell you, you want to say no. Do not use the official transcript entry. Number one, it costs money to do that. Number two, I have seen so many students have errors built into that they have to correct anyway themselves, even though they got official, like professional transcript entry. And it's better just to do it yourself. Actually, at the end, I'm going to give you a link to our GPA calculator, which is actually set up to basically have you already know what you're going to be putting this thing in eventually anyway. So don't let me forget to give you that link. And I would just say, no thanks, I'll handle it myself. I think everybody should do that. This applies to AMC as well, because they also have a professional transcript entry, and it usually causes problems. And it takes forever. We've heard students have like 4 to 6 weeks to get your transcript entered using this technique. Because first it has to wait for the transcript to get attached to your application, and then it takes them like another several weeks to just do the transcript entry. So it's better just to do it yourself. It really, really is. So boom. And then, all right, I'm going to start putting my transcript in. I'm going to do start. And they're just going to say, all right, let's just do an add a quarter. And add a quarter. Which quarter is it? It's my first quarter, which was fall 2020. Notice how it limits now the years to when I was here. It's not going to give you all the years. It's going to base it on those years you put in already. So fall of 2020 is my first quarter. I was a freshman then. Completion status is completed. Add a course. Let's say I took this 102A. That's whatever it's called. I'm just going to put general bio because I can't remember its actual name. Then I got to select a subject. So the subject here is biology. It was what, 3 units for that one? The grade was, let's say I got a B+. I put that in there for B+. And notice this box I can't enter. It's going to say CAS grade. Whatever the CAS system decides to use for your grade, sometimes they turn minuses into pluses. They have some own characteristic ways of doing things. That's something you cannot affect. Here's a major difference between AMC and all the other applications. So AMCAS versus all the other applications. See how big this subject list is? That's huge, right? There's a lot of different things. Like they have astronomy and biology, and not just regular biology. I can look for other biologies, biological psychology and biomechanics. And I've got a lot more choices in this particular type of application. And we don't have that in AMCAS. In AMCAS, it has basically 12 or 13 categories, and they're umbrella categories. So you'll have biology, you'll have chemistry, you'll have physics, you'll have math, you'll have English, you'll have language, like foreign language. It's a lot broader categories, and you just have to fit the best one, fit it the best you can. If you have any questions about that, that's where you come to us. We can help you figure out, like, okay, what should I be classifying this as, whatever. And this is what determines your science versus your non-science GPA. So in this application, biology would be a science subject, but something like, 3, that whatever. And what you would want to do is these titles, the course title should match your transcript. And whatever that is, that's like a literature English class, whatever that would be called. Fine, like English probably works fine for that one. For units, and I got an A in that one. Boom. You need to enter every single class yourselves. Correct. So I would just start in the first quarter and boom, boom, boom. Go off your transcript that you like, get a copy of transcript for yourself and make sure they match. Like you've ever taken at Davis and everywhere else, because once I do my whole Davis transcript, I'm going to also have to go back and do Solano Community College. So if I took classes there, I got to do the same thing. My first semester there was fall of 2018, and I was still a freshman. Honestly, the academic status thing, don't stress about it. If it's your first year, you're a freshman. If it's your second year, you're a sophomore. If it's your third year, you're a junior. It doesn't have to match anything, really. Going back to our Davis transcript for a second. Save, okay. Going back to my Davis transcript for a second. Let's say I am applying, but I still have like a couple more classes I'm taking. What do I do in that scenario? Add a quarter. Maybe it was my last, or maybe I'm going to do my last quarter there. I haven't finished it yet. I was a senior. And if I'm still working on that particular quarter and I haven't finished yet, I would do in progress or planned. And so if I add a course to that, notice how I can't enter a grade. There's no way to enter a grade for that one because I will not have had a grade at that point. So if you're still going to be finishing up a couple more quarters, you want to put in what you anticipate you're going to take in those quarters, in those semesters. What if there was a pass, no pass grade? Then you put a pass, no pass grade in there. It's not here. And like if I just did pass, no pass on general biology, which I would suggest you don't do, I would just put a P in there for pass and it just NP for no pass. Okay. So transcripts. Any questions about what you got to do to enter your transcripts? These are all great questions. Keep them coming. So do you need to enter repeated courses? Yes. The repeated courses will show up on your transcript and they will show up with that grade. So if you got like say a C minus and then or D plus and then redid the class and got a B, you have to put both versions of that class in there and the D plus and the B. So just because it's dropped at Davis does not mean it's dropped, period. So all grades that for all classes that you took will show up in your transcript. They just won't be reflected in your Davis GPA, but on your transcripts here, they will be reflected. So that's actually another reason why I'm going to give you that link to the GPA calculator. You don't want to be surprised because I see a lot of times if you're using Oasis just drops them from the calculation. But your GPA, as far as it comes to these programs, will include repeated classes. So I don't want that to be a surprise. That's why I created that spreadsheet. You enter dropping or entering classes you ended up dropping? Yes, if they show up on the transcript. If a class is not on the transcript, it doesn't go on there. But occasionally you'll get a late drop or something like that that will show up as a W or a D, or not a D, but what do they call the drops? WDs. Then that will show up on your transcript. You need to include that in your application. So drops or withdrawals that show up on the transcript must be in your application. Clarify, the official transcript sent directly to AMCAS, right? We are entering grades ourselves, or we wait, what? Just to clarify, the official transcript is sent directly to AMCAS. Yes, that is correct. When we are entering grades ourselves, are we doing it based on what shows up in OASIS, or do we? You should be basing out what your official transcript says. That's why I mean you should get your own copy of your official transcript. Because OASIS is not your transcript. That's like a database that pulls from your registrar information, and it may not be identical. And if stuff is not what your transcript says, then it causes errors and they might kick your application back to you. And so you don't want that to happen. So the one, you got to order transcripts for the application service. Ordering a transcript for yourself looks different. Like you can actually ask for an official, or sorry, like a PDF of your official transcript through Davis. Through any school, you can usually do that. And that's what I would encourage you to do. I would also say order some paper copies of your official transcript just for yourself, because I'm an old guy. I've been through life for a while, and I will tell you, I needed to order a transcript for a job I got like 6 years ago that I didn't have a copy of. So I had to go back and figure it out and do all that stuff. And like it was a long time ago when I did that school. So I would just say have a few copies at some point of your official transcript in hand. So if you need them later on, you have them. So that's just that's future old person telling you that. So it's gonna pay off in the future. All right. What other things do we need to do on our transcripts? Or on our exam, or on our applications. The AMC does not have this section. All the other applications do, and that's your standardized tests. Because the AMC, and the reason I also don't use AMC or AMCAS for my example here is because AMCAS, your MCAT score is attached to it automatically. There's no need to request your MCAT to go to the AMCAS application, because AMCAS is AAMC, MCAT is AAMC. However, you must request score reports to go to all of these other applications. So, like if I'm going to submit an MCAT, have I taken the test? Yes or no? When am I planning on taking it? What's my ID for it, et cetera, et cetera. I need to input that exam here, but I also need to make sure I submit that exam to the schools, to the application service to which I'm applying. So that's an important piece that I think people forget when you're applying PA school, because you might use a GRE or dental school because you got to do your DAT and so on and so forth. And in the DAT case, you got to send it to individual schools. So standardized tests are automated for AMCAS, but none of the other systems. You have to enter them manually, and you have to send in your score reports manually. Another question here: what if this OASIS displays a course that states W03 in the lighter color with no? It's not about what OASIS shows. That's what I'm saying. I don't care what OASIS says. You got to look at your official transcript and put on your application what the official transcript says. So even though OASIS has that, it might show differently on your official transcript. It probably will, because I believe your W03s won't even show on your transcript. I don't think those actually end up on your transcript. So don't put in your OASIS information. Put in your transcript information. Question, yes.
Hi, so I took my DAT this past November, but I'm not applying until this summer. So I selected like all the dental schools on that list. Is that like that one time good enough, or would I have to like send them again for
You
this?
don't have to send. So if you selected all the dental schools at the time you took it, there's no need to resubmit that. You would just enter
Got
your
it.
score on the application.
Okay.
Presumably, they've already gotten your
Hmm.
score reports and they have filed it.
Okay.
Is because as long as you use the same ID number, it's
Hmm.
going to connect together in their system.
Got it. Thank you.
So yeah, and that goes for all the other tests too. If like when you first took the test, you sent it off to the required schools, it's there. You don't have to resubmit it or anything, even if you aren't going to apply for like another year. If you add a school that you hadn't originally sent it to, then you would have to send a score report to that additional school. Good question. And then I didn't talk about high schools, but you got to add a high school in there. It's weird, but yeah, there's that. The next part that's probably the most important, I'm not going to talk about personal information because that's all demographic stuff. What's your address? What's your phone number? What do you identify as, et cetera, et cetera. Supporting information, this is going to be your letters of evaluation or your letters of recommendation. Most systems call them evaluations. And again, this is where I would say you want to get this as your second thing done. Like your transcripts and your evaluation requests are probably some of the first things you want to do no matter what. And to create an evaluation request, you put in the information for the person that you're asking, when you're expecting them to send it in, and that's a discussion you have with your evaluator before you make your evaluation request. Let me point that out. Let me say it again. Discuss this process with your evaluators, your recommenders, before you just create the evaluation request. Because once you create the evaluation request, what happens? It sends them an email immediately. It sends them a link. And if they're not expecting it, they might go, what is this? So you need to make sure they know it's coming and that they know you've got a due date because you don't want them to get notified before you've had that conversation. All right. So it's important to get all that arranged. That's why I usually suggest doing letters of rec, like asking that initial ask for letters of rec in March so they know it's coming. And that was a whole nother session. I don't want to go down that road, but have that discussion before you set up your evaluators. This question is always an interesting one. I waive my right of access to this evaluation. You're going to see this on all application services. What's the correct answer for this one? Because there is a correct answer for this one. You can leave either answer. Correct. Honestly, it raises eyebrows if you say no. And I would definitely tell you not to say no. You want to make sure they understand that you're confident you're getting a strong evaluation. If you say no, they assume the evaluators of your application will assume you don't trust that person, and that's why you want to see it. So just say yes. Just waive the right to seeing that evaluation of that letter of rec. Permission to contact. I think both of these are fine. Permission for schools to contact reference, permission to contact reference. Basically, if they have any questions or if they want to get another opinion or something like that from the recommender, then this allows the school or the application service to discuss it with them. So that's it. And put in all that information, save the evaluation request. Once you do that, they're going to get that evaluation request, and boom, the process starts. So much like the transcript, this is a slow process, and it's actually very dependent on when your evaluators send these in. So make sure they know it's coming. Make sure you discuss a due date that's shortly after you submit your application, or even slightly before. That's fine too. And there you go. Interfolio is great, but there's one problem with Interfolio. Interfolio has an issue in that it only works with pre-med or with the med systems, MD and DO, and dental right now. Pretty much none of the other application services work with Interfolio at the current time. So if you're dental or you're pre-med, then Interfolio is great. For those of you who don't know what Interfolio is, it's an online service. Just look up interfolio.com, where you can actually have the recommenders submit to Interfolio, and then you can have them submit from Interfolio to your application. How does it work for a committee letter? So committee letter, you set them up as the recommender. So you would talk to whoever does the committee letter, and they'll give you the information to put in here. Like, what's the first name? What's the last name? What's the email address that you should be putting in here? And then, so like, to give an example, for our postback program, we have a person that's their job is to sign off on those letters. So we put their name in there, which is none of us in the postback. We put our email address as postback letters at UC Davis, and we submit our composite letter, is what we call it, to the application. What kind of due date should you give your evaluators? Should you give them a due date far before when you plan to apply, actually submit? Not far before. I would say maybe a week or two before you submit as the earliest I would probably go. But again, like I said, it's a conversation with your recommenders, with your evaluators. Just be frank with them, like saying, I would just say, I'd like to submit my application by date. Could you get your letter in by other date, and agree upon that before you enter that into the system. That's the best way. That's the fastest way you're going to get your letters. And I would say don't do it months before, because that would probably mean I don't want to do it. I do know some recommenders that prefer it. They go like, hey, just set it up now and I'll submit it like way early. But for the most part, most evaluators are going to wait till the last minute. Not going to lie. That's what they're going to do. The next rest of your application is a lot of writing. Experiences. The difference between experiences for MD and experiences for everybody else. MD has a limit to 15 experiences. You can only enter 15 experiences. You get to identify 3 of them as most meaningful experiences. And then for all the rest of the applications, you can add as many experiences as you choose. I would just be careful. I wouldn't put in like 20, 30, 40 experiences. That's going to be overwhelming, and they're going to stop reading the list. I would keep sort of a mental limit of up to 15 for all your applications, to be honest. There's a question about, could it be okay for the due date to be 4 to 6 weeks after you plan to submit? That's a little late. That's going to delay your application potentially. Again, if the recommender doesn't want to do it until that late after, you might look for another recommender just to keep that application process rolling. Especially if you're MD or dental, because those are rolling admissions. If you're vet and it doesn't matter as much because vet doesn't do rolling, then that would be fine for the 4 to 6 weeks after. For experiences, should you write in paragraph format or should you write in bullet points? I would suggest not using bullet points. I would suggest using paragraphs. You're limited in the number of characters you have, but paragraphs are going to be easier to read, and you don't want this to come across like a resume. And here's why. Your experience type, you have to choose the type. So maybe it's a shadowing experience. I put in all the contact info. Whoever the supervisor is, if you know who it is, great. If you don't, do your best guess. Notice how this is not required. Start date, end date, status, that's required. Title, compensated, blah, 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 all this stuff. This is a part I see a lot of people struggle with. You don't need to be 100% accurate. Just give, I worked about 10 hours a week for 12 weeks. It's close enough. They're not going to check you on that kind of stuff. As long as you don't put I worked 187 hours a week, because, well, let's say 168 is the only number of hours. You can't work that many. So you just have to put in reasonable numbers here. And then description, what I would say you want to focus on in the description is, yes, description, key responsibilities, but here you want to point out your core competencies, the things that make you a strong candidate. Like, are you a strong communicator? Are you a good team worker? Do you have a good understanding of blah, blah? And this is something you're going to talk about when you're talking about writing your experiences, but you definitely want those things to be pointed out here. So there's a bunch of questions here. If we were part of a student-run clinic and did shadowing within it, would it be under volunteer or under shadowing? At that point, you just got to be, you got to pick the best match, right? So shadowing usually means I was working directly with the doctor and following them around, watching what they were doing or whatever the healthcare provider is. Volunteering is sort of a generalized thing. Usually I would look at student-run clinics as being volunteering. Usually. Again, it depends on your experience. And that's where if you're struggling to like label the experiences as certain things, that, you know, bring it up to us. Come to drop-ins or something, or set an appointment. We can help you figure that out. If you took an EMT course through Davis, does that go under academic history or experiences? That would probably go under licenses and certifications. Or in the case of your MD application, they don't have licenses and certifications. That would just go under experience. So yeah, your EMT class would probably be an experience because you didn't get college credit for that. There's no transcript for the EMT program. For the AMCAS application, there's a required section of the contact title, name, phone, and email under the experience section. In this case, if the supervisor we had then no longer affiliated. Yes, even if they're not affiliated anymore, you can still put them in there. It doesn't matter where they're at the current time. As long as you have a current contact info, even if it's not even current contact info, it's fine because they're not gonna call these people up unless something's really wonky. So like the only time I've ever heard of one of these experiences getting checked on is when somebody put some really like outrageous statements in there. They're like that they were like literally lord and master over whatever. That would be the only time they're gonna check it if it's hinky. So as long as it's not hinky, you're fine. They're not gonna, just do your best. That's my answer. Do your best. Should we tell mini stories for the experiences? I'm gonna leave that to the experienced person. We have a session just on that to talk through. That's the Ryan Gray suggestion I think you're talking about. And there's just not enough characters, in my opinion, to write a true mini story. So my opinion is do your best to include a crystallizing moment in your experiences, but I don't think you have time to really write a story. If that makes sense. But again, there's a whole session on writing up your experiences, so I'm going to leave that to that person. So you get all your experiences in here, save them, boom, boom, boom. Achievements, same thing. Licenses, same thing. These are your, like, if you've done a poster session or something like that, or if you've been on you had a publication, you do that. Licenses and certifications. This is specific pretty much to certain applications. Not all apps will have licenses and certifications on it. So AMCAS doesn't have licenses and certifications. Many of these others do not. But if you had something like an EMT license, or a phlebotomy license, or a CNA license, or an MA license, that's what would go in here. Told us to explain our roles, not really stories, since that can be in a personal statement. I agree. I agree totally with that info. If you had a sporting achievement, that's fine. I mean, your experiences are not limited to just healthcare stuff, extracurricular activities. You should have a hobby. In fact, AMCAS calls it hobby. Like, they don't call it extracurricular. They say they've got a choice in your experience type to call it hobby. So if you have a hobby, what might be sports, it might be it might be art, it could be playing an instrument. Those are all great things to put in here. Don't leave anything off the table. All of that is perfectly good stuff to have in here. The next thing is essay, aka personal statement. Every application needs a personal statement. It's all essentially the same question with an unwritten part. So you see the question here. Please explain why you are interested in being a insert field here. The dental one looks a little different. They change the wording and they turn it into 3 prompts. It's all the same stuff. Why are you interested in being a whatever? The one thing I want to encourage you to make sure you're writing here is make sure you include what's going to make you good at it. So Not just why, but also what makes you good at it. But again, there's a whole session on writing your personal statement. Let's leave that to those folks. The one thing, the tricky thing about writing these essays and your experiences and all that is don't type them in here because you might screw up. You don't want to submit a typo. So here's what you would do. Write it up in Google Drive or in Word or something like that. Once you've got it edited to the place you want it, copy and paste it into a text editor. So for Microsoft, for Windows computers, the text editor is just called Notepad. For Macs, I believe it's just called text, if I don't miss my guess. And so copy and paste your personal statement into that text editor and check for hidden characters. Because these days, lots of Word files and whatchamacallit, Google Drive files, they have sort of hidden code in the background that when you paste it into a text-based thing, those codes become visible. So go through, check that you don't have any of that garbage in there. And then once you've done that in the text editor, then paste it here. So edit in Word or Google, paste into your text editor, make sure there's no phantom characters, and then paste into your application. Another place where I see lots of extra characters, because you notice it counts the number of characters, right? Another place I see a lot of people having extra characters is the end of sentences. This one is smart. It didn't count those extra spaces, right? Or did it? Oh, it did. Look at what happens to that number. All those spaces count, but they're invisible. So those of you who have a habit of leaving like extra characters at the end of paragraphs or between sentences and stuff, delete. You don't want to lose those characters. So make sure one space between periods in the next sentence and don't have lots of space at the end of paragraphs. That's going to use your characters wisely. All right. Last thing, I'm going to go back to my application, and then for all of your applications except for AMCAS. AMCAS does this chunk, program materials, separately. We tend to call those secondaries, but most of the programs are going to do this as supplemental essays, where before you submit, you write your supplemental materials. So I go into this one and it says, oh, here's what this is describing the program that I'm applying to. There's questions. So each program might have very specific questions they're going to ask you about their program, aka supplementals, or in the case of AMCAS, you don't do it with your primary application. You do that later on as a supplemental application. So I kind of like the way most of the programs do it than med schools, because med schools, many of them, most of them do secondaries, where you get those essays once you've submitted your application and you have to write them then. With all the other applications, pretty much, you're doing them here. You might get a couple extra questions later on, but for the most part, you're answering these questions right away before you actually submit your application. To me, I prefer that. So this one's got 1, 2, 3, 4 additional essays. Before you get too far down your application, go into each of these and find out how much extra writing am I doing? Because each school is going to have potentially 1 to 4 or 5 or 6 essays that you have to write on top of the primary application. And in the case of AMCAS with med schools, those are going to be mailed to you after you submit. Here, we're going to get them right away. So that's going to be time you have to count in as part of doing your application. Then prerequisites. This is pretty much a non-AMCAS thing as well, where you end up having to identify in your transcript which classes count as which of the prereqs. AMCAS tends to, they take care of themselves. They'll determine whether or not you fit the prereqs. Here we have to say, these are going to be the classes I want you to use for human anatomy and physiology, classes I want to use for micro, for chemistry, blah, 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 blah. So these will fall under the program materials section. So like I said, program materials, that's unique to the liaison ones. The only application that doesn't do it is AMCAS. AMCAS will have like basically all the rest of the stuff under like supporting info is what it's going to be. And then you can add more programs. You can remove, like, maybe I don't actually want to go to that school. So I decided, I can't delete that program because they're going to make me have at least one before I can delete it. And that's kind of the thing with these systems. You got to have at least one program picked before you can work on the application. So it doesn't matter what it is, as long as when you actually go on to submit the application, it'll tell you whether it's complete or not, and then I can submit. So there you go. And then once you submitted, they all have some sort of check status to see where's your application in the process. So what I'll say about that is there's kind of two stages. There's submitted and not verified. And then there's submitted and verified. You're looking for everything to be submitted and verified. Because if submitted and not verified, that means they're still checking it. And that can take anywhere from 1 to 3 weeks. Depends on where in the cycle you submit. Depends on how long it's taking them to do it at that time. So it feels better once they all get to that submitted and verified status. You like submitted and verified. That means once they're verified, where do they end up going? Yep. Once they're verified, they're off to the schools. And then your application process has begun. The letter of rec email sends the evaluator when we submit the application or before. It's the letter of rec email sends the evaluator before. When you set it up, it will send out that notification to that recommender. That's why I say get those done and have that discussion before you actually put in that due date, because you don't want them to be surprised by it. So there's a lot of stuff going on these applications. In the end, most of the applications are pretty clear on telling you where you're at in the process. Like, I got this much done, or I got this much done, or I got this much done. And it's just take your time and make sure everything turns green and you're good. This is where it will state whether we are accepted or no. So acceptance and denials and things like that will be through a separate portal. You won't see that. Well, you might actually see that status through here as well. But usually there's a secondary portal that will have all that information from the schools themselves. What if you're not taking all the prereqs but are planning to? That's what that thing was when we were looking at our academic history, where you can do, gosh darn it. What am I trying to do here? My application, academic history, transcript entry, where I can do things like put in progress or planned. So if you're still working on a few prereqs, put them in progress or planned. As long as they're done by the time you start the school, you're good to go. With very few exceptions. There's some programs that say you have to have certain prereqs done by application time, but that's less common than just have them done before you start their program. Yep. One more question about letter of recs. What window would you recommend having the due date for evaluators? I'd say within, I usually try to talk to them and say, can you get it done a couple of weeks before I plan on submitting? I think that's reasonable for most of them. But like I said, it's going to differ for the person too. Maybe they want to get it done right away. Cool, roll with it. If maybe they're going on a vacation or something and they don't want to do it until a few weeks after your application's due, as long as you know it's coming, good. Your application can be verified without your letters of rec, but it can't be sent on to the schools until it has all your letters of rec. So you just don't want to delay them too much. They'll still verify, but just won't kick to the school yet. I would call the sweet spot 2 weeks before. That's my preference. Sorry. The sneeze was building for like 10 minutes, it felt like. So Any other questions? All right, then let's call it a day. Thank you for coming down and learn a little bit about how these applications work. There are, like I said, minor differences between AMCAS and the rest of these systems, but for the most part, I mean, you're doing the same things. It's just going to visually look a little different. Uh-oh. Well, that was fun. Zoom crashed on me, but it looks like everybody's gone anyway. So sorry about that weird delay. And we will get the recording up online as soon as we can. Bye-bye now.